There is a certain kind of person who can walk into a meeting room at work or sit down at a family dinner
I
and
feel
feel
like I
their
always
whole
mess
body
things up.
tighten
Nobody
before
thinks
anything
that.
has
We
even
love you.
happened.
I just don't know
No
why I
one
get
is
so nervous about
arguing,
everything.
no one
It's
is
okay to
raising
feel
their
that way.
voice, but they already
I
notice
think
the
it's
pause
just a
before
matter of
someone answers,
perspective.
the smile that looks a little too careful, the shift in a person's tone, the strange emotional tension
Yes,
no one else seems to
exactly.
mention. Most people would call that intuition. They would say this person is observant, deep, emotionally intelligent. And maybe they are. But that is not the whole story. Because when your mind is always scanning for what feels off, you do not simply notice the moment. You carry it, you replay it on the drive home. You keep feeling it long after everyone else has moved on. So the real problem is not awareness itself. The real problem is when awareness never gets to rest. And if you have ever wondered why you can never fully relax around other people, this is where that pattern begins. This is not just overthinking, and it is not just intelligence either. It is a mind that keeps reading what other minds miss. The hidden meaning behind a sentence, the tension under a smile, the emotional weight sitting quietly inside a room. That kind of awareness can feel like a gift. In some ways it is, but it can also become a trap. Because once your mind learns to read everything, it becomes very hard to stop reading. And over time, that does something to the way you think, the way you feel, the way you relate to people, and even the way your body responds to the world. So in this video, we are going to unpack why some people become this way, what it costs them, and how they can keep their depth without losing their peace. To understand why some people live like this, we have to go back to the moment awareness stopped being a trait and became a form of protection. There are usually two main paths into this kind of over-awareness. For some people, it begins with temperament. Psychology often describes them as highly sensitive persons, or HSPs. This is closely related to sensory processing sensitivity, which means their nervous system tends to process stimulation more deeply than usual. They do not just notice more. They often feel more, absorb more, and stay affected longer. From the beginning, life arrives with the volume turned up. But for others, this awareness is not something they were born with. It is something they learned. In psychology, this is often closer to hypervigilance. It usually begins in emotionally unpredictable environments, especially in childhood. A child in that kind of home does not get to stay soft for very long. They start listening to the sound of keys turning in the front door to guess what kind of night this will be. They watch the way an adult sets a bag down on the table and instantly know whether to speak, stay quiet, or disappear. They learn how to read the atmosphere before they ever learn how to relax inside it. And over time, that changes the brain. The amygdala, which works like the brain's danger alarm, gets activated again and again. So the mind adapts. It starts scanning early. It starts predicting. It starts trying to catch danger before danger fully arrives. After enough repetition, vigilance no longer feels like a response. It starts to feel like personality. So if you have ever blamed yourself for being too much, too intense, or too alert, this is important to understand. You may not be broken at all. You may be carrying a form of awareness that was shaped by sensitivity or by survival. And this is where it turns tragic. What helped them survive early on can quietly make peace feel unfamiliar later in life. So what does this look like in adult life? It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it just looks like someone who is never fully off. The first sign is living in constant analysis mode. For most people, a message like, "Can we talk tomorrow morning?" is just a message. Maybe a little annoying, maybe a little vague, but still just a message. For someone who is overly aware, it is almost never that simple. The moment they read it, their mind starts working. Why tomorrow morning? Why that wording? Why does it feel a little cold? Did something change? Did I do something wrong? They do not just read the sentence. They read into the sentence. Then they read into themselves. And this does not only happen with messages. It happens in conversations too. They notice the pause before someone answers, the tiny shift in tone, the way a smile does not fully reach the eyes. The small change in energy that most people would brush past without even thinking about it. Part of this is connected to what psychology calls the default mode network, or DMN. It is one of the systems involved in reflection, self-focused thinking, and replaying experiences in the mind. In people who are too aware, that system can feel like it never fully powers down. So on the outside, they may look calm. They answer emails. They sit through meetings. They keep the day moving. But inside, hidden calculations are running the entire time. And by the end of the day, they are exhausted, not because they did too much, but because they interpreted too much. And after enough years, that habit stops being something they do. It becomes the atmosphere inside their own head. But the exhaustion doesn't stay pointed at the world. Eventually, it turns inward. That is where the second sign begins: hyper self-awareness. At this point, the mind is no longer just scanning the room, it starts scanning the self. In psychology, this connects to metacognition, the ability to think about your own thoughts, something closely linked to the prefrontal cortex. Everyone does this sometimes, but for overly aware people, it can feel constant. They do not just feel an emotion, they audit it. They might be sitting quietly in the middle of an ordinary day and suddenly feel a little empty. And instead of simply noticing it, the mind immediately steps in. Why do I feel this? Is something wrong with me? Shouldn't I be fine right now? The same thing happens socially. They tell a story during a small gathering, people laugh, the moment passes, but their mind keeps going. Did I talk too long? Was my timing off? Did that sound awkward? Why did that one person make that face? It is like living with a camera in the mind that never stops recording and replaying. And after a while, that does something painful. Awareness gets deeper, but presence gets thinner. They do not just experience life. Part of them is always watching themselves experience it. And when that inner surveillance runs long enough, it changes something deeper than comfort. It changes trust. And this is where the cost starts to enter relationships. Human beings naturally use something called theory of mind. It is the ability to guess what other people may be thinking or feeling. But in people who are too aware, that ability can become so active that it stops feeling like insight and starts feeling like distance. They begin to notice the motive behind the words. A person at work suddenly becomes unusually warm right after they have been praised in front of others. An apology sounds correct on the surface, but something about it feels too polished, too convenient, too perfectly timed. So they start reading beneath everything. They are not always cynical, they are not necessarily bitter, but they lose the ability to take people in simply. A kind gesture no longer feels like just a kind gesture. A compliment can feel layered, a promise can feel fragile before it even has the chance to prove itself. And that creates a very quiet kind of loneliness, because the loss is not childish innocence. It is the loss of being able to receive people simply. The loss is subtle. They do not become cruel. They just stop receiving people at face value. And the loneliness gets worse for one reason. They do not only read other people's emotions, they absorb them. And for some people, the loneliness runs even deeper than that. Because they do not only understand what other people feel, they start to feel it with them. This is where cognitive empathy begins to spill into emotional empathy. They do not just recognize pain in someone else's voice. Their own body starts responding to it. Part of this may be connected to systems in the brain often associated with empathy, including what people sometimes call mirror neurons. In simple terms, the nervous system does not just observe emotion, it starts echoing it. So a friend calls them late at night, heartbroken and barely holding it together, and the conversation ends, but the heaviness does not. It stays in their chest the next morning. Or they walk into a tense room, and before anyone says anything, their body has already absorbed the pressure in the air. This is why they often become very good at calming other people. They know how to soften their voice, they know how to choose the gentlest words, they know how to lower the emotional temperature in a room. But that gift has a cost. The person who calms the room is often the one carrying the room home. Some people leave conversations. They don't. They leave carrying them. And when a nervous system stays this open for too long, even the body starts speaking in alarms. And when that sensitivity keeps building, it does not stay in the mind. It starts showing up in the body. You might have felt this before. You sleep a little less than usual. You drink a strong coffee, your heart starts beating a bit faster. For most people, that just feels like energy. But for someone who is overly aware, the mind reacts differently. The moment the body changes, the brain starts asking, why is this happening? Is something wrong? And that is where the loop begins. A sensation appears. The mind interprets it as danger. The body reacts with stress. The heartbeat gets even stronger. And now the brain feels even more certain that something is wrong. Nothing dangerous actually happened. But the system is already in alarm mode. After a while, this becomes exhausting because it is no longer just thoughts that feel unstable. The body starts to feel unpredictable too. So instead of feeling like a place you can rest in, your body starts to feel like something you have to monitor. Like a dashboard full of warning lights that never fully turn off. At some point, they stop trusting even neutral signals from their own body. At some point, the body stops feeling like home and starts feeling like another source of warnings. But even that is not the deepest cost. The deepest cost is what happens when awareness stops observing life and starts trying to control it. And this is where all of it comes together. At some point, awareness stops being simple observation. It stops being just a way of noticing. It becomes a way of protecting. A quiet strategy begins to form underneath everything. If I can see it coming, maybe it won't hurt as much when it arrives. So they start rehearsing conversations that have not happened yet. They prepare for distance that has not even begun. They imagine the fallout before reality has had the chance to unfold. Their mind keeps building versions of the future, not because they want to, but because some part of them believes preparedness is safer than surprise. This is where analysis paralysis begins. They do not just think about life. They try to get ahead of it. They try to reduce uncertainty. They try to manage pain before pain becomes real. And slowly, without meaning to, they start treating life like a high-risk project. Every shift in tone becomes a variable. Every silence becomes a possibility. Every relationship becomes something to monitor, prepare for, and mentally stabilize before it has even had the chance to breathe. That is the deepest cost. They do not lose peace because they feel too much. They lose peace because they never stop preparing for pain. So the tragedy is not only that they are tired, it is that protection begins to replace presence. They are no longer fully living inside the moment. Part of them is always bracing, calculating, adjusting, getting ready. In trying to stay ahead of pain, they slowly step outside their own life. And this is why the answer is not less awareness. It is a different relationship to awareness. And this is where the shift begins. Because the solution is not to become less aware. You cannot simply turn that part of your mind off. It is like asking your eyes to see less clearly. The real change is not about reducing awareness. It is about changing what you do with it. In many forms of psychotherapy, this often comes down to something very simple, but very difficult. Learning to set emotional boundaries. Learning to notice without absorbing. To feel without obeying every signal. To see clearly without turning everything into your responsibility. Because the problem is not your depth, it is the weight you keep assigning to everything you notice. Depth is not the problem. Unfiltered depth is, and when that begins to shift, something inside you starts to soften. You are still aware. You still see what others miss, but you are no longer carrying all of it at once. And in practice, this usually begins with 3 quiet shifts. The first shift is this: not every silence is a message. When someone replies with less warmth than usual, or pauses a little too long, the overly aware mind wants to explain it immediately. Did I do something wrong? Are they upset? Did something change? But not every short reply is rejection. Not every pause is tension. Sometimes people are tired. Sometimes they are distracted. Sometimes they are carrying a weight that has nothing to do with you. A pause is not always rejection. Sometimes it is just a pause. The second shift is this: not every emotion is a command. Anxiety can show up without needing to become a project. Sadness can appear without needing to be solved in the same moment. A fast heartbeat, a heavy chest, a wave of discomfort, none of these automatically mean you need to act. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is notice the feeling, let it be there, and not rush to obey it. A feeling can be real without becoming an order. And the third shift is this: not every insight is your responsibility. You may see someone's insecurity very clearly. You may notice that a relationship dynamic feels unstable. You may sense that someone is speaking from pain instead of honesty, but seeing something clearly does not mean you have to carry it, fix it, or manage it for everyone involved. Understanding someone is not the same as being responsible for them. And this is where something important begins to change. When those three shifts are practiced, awareness starts to feel different. It stops feeling like a burden and starts becoming discernment. You still notice, you still understand, but you are no longer turning every signal into an obligation, because clarity becomes wisdom only when it stops becoming obligation. This is when awareness stops feeling like a burden and starts becoming discernment. And when that shift happens, they do not become shallow. They finally become lighter. Their awareness does not disappear. It matures. They still notice what others miss. They still feel deeply. They still understand the fragile parts of people and the hidden tensions inside a room. But they are no longer dragged by every flaw, every shift, every signal. Something inside them becomes steadier. They move from fear to curiosity, from prediction to presence, from over-control to a quieter kind of inner balance. And that is the real change. The goal was never to become less deep. It was to make depth feel livable. The light in their mind does not have to stay a harsh laser, exposing every weakness, every crack, every possibility of pain. It can become something gentler, a candle. Bright enough to understand human fragility, but warm enough not to abandon themselves in the process. A mind that once scanned for danger can learn to stay long enough to feel life. And if any part of this felt uncomfortably familiar, then you already know this is not just a concept. It is a way of carrying life. So if this spoke to you, tell me which sign felt the most familiar or which part of this video made you feel the most seen. And if you know someone who is tired from living with a mind that never fully powers down, share this with them. Sometimes people do not need louder advice. They need language for what they have been carrying. And if your mind is always preparing for what could go wrong, stay for the next video, because being too aware is often only the surface of a much older survival pattern. If Fight Shelter helps you put language around what you've been carrying, stay with us. There is more here for the parts of you that learn to stay alert for too long.